Well, hello, Frederick family. My name is Pastor Chris Geyer, and I'm here with Pastor Scott Gilbert, and we have another installment for you for Pastor's Talk, question and answer. We'll get right into it. So I want to get on to the first question that was submitted, and it is this. How can we deal with the constant stress we are experiencing right now? We are all living in a time when many things have changed, but many of us are living in situations where everything has changed. Working from home, schooling at home, isolated from friends and extended family, difficulty shopping for groceries, uncertain finances. Many things, big and small, have changed. And we don't know how, when, or if they will return to normal. How do we have peace in the midst of so much stress? Scott?
Well, I think we just need to be honest in acknowledging that there has been a massive amount of change, and there has more than likely been a lot of stress that you have gone through. Just like the question said, there are things that have changed in your life. I can remember about 5-6 weeks ago, the first time I went into the grocery store after this happened and just saw empty shelves, and just how shocking it was to see that. And then ever since that time, it's just been a roller coaster of everything being different. And so probably for every one of you who are watching this right now, you have experienced some concerns, anxieties, some kind of stresses, whether it's related to this virus or the conditions that you're living in now. It's just the reality of what we're going through. But the problem is that we're not to worry, as Jesus says, and stress and anxiety can just really eat at us. Proverbs 12:25 says, anxiety in a man's heart weighs him down. And you've probably felt that. David Platt and J.D. Greer write about stress almost being like this backpack that you're wearing, and everything that adds to your stress is essentially adding weight to that. And so there's something with your job, that's weight added. Something going on with your kids, weight added. Difficulty in being able to be around friends or church family or whatever, and so weight added. And it just seems like over and over there are these anxieties that can be added to you before you even realize that it's happening. But clearly, Jesus tells us, don't worry. What can worry add to anything to your life? And we're told to cast our cares on Jesus. 1 Peter Chapter 5, verse 7 says, cast all your anxieties on him because he cares. And so the question then becomes, how do we do that? And a lot of that then comes down to how we take captive our mind. What are we preaching to ourselves? A friend of mine I was talking with today was just telling me just how he'd been reminded of Psalm 42 over and over again over the past several days, that he's reminding his soul, almost speaking to himself of the truth of who God is and the goodness of God. And that's essentially what we need to do. When cares and anxieties come upon us, we need to stop at that moment and remind ourselves of who God is. Remind ourselves of the sovereignty of God. Remind ourselves of God's goodness and what he's done and how he takes care of us and how he won't abandon us, so that we don't just keep letting those thoughts run wild in our minds and just keep adding that stress and anxiety. So it sounds simple, but basically you got to preach to yourself to remind yourself of the great truth of who God is and that he cares for you, and don't keep focused on that. And so that's a simple way to help think through this in this difficult time. And so now I know that we have another question that's related to the time that we're in somewhat, but that switches gears a little bit. So, Chris, the next question then is, how do we grow our marriages, strengthen our marriages in this time where maybe people are more together as a couple than they're used to?
Yeah, it's a good question. So if we're building a house, an A-frame house, the first thing you're going to need is a foundation, all right? And for the Christian, in Christian marriage, the foundation is a covenant understanding of marriage, of that relationship. Now, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a Christian martyr in the 1940s, early 1940s. And he wrote a profound letter while he was in a concentration camp in Flossenburg in Germany, because he resisted the Nazi movements there in Germany. But he was still a pastor and still caring for people both in the concentration camp and family members. And he wrote to a niece. And he said this to his niece who was getting married, this piece of advice. He said, "It is not your love that sustains your marriage, but from now on, the marriage that sustains your love." And the reason I think that is such brilliant insight is because it really captures the essence of Christian marriage. It's this foundation of commitment, of covenant, that will then sustain and allow the subjective feelings and experience of love to take root and to grow. But we need that foundation. We need that framework. So this covenant understanding. So if you have that as the foundation, it's ideal if there's a common commitment to the lordship of Jesus Christ, both husband and wife. And from that, then, an understanding that we're committed to one another. Covenant being a binding agreement with one another. Okay? So if that's the foundation, then how do we build upon that to strengthen our marriages in this time? And I came up with 3 categories. 3 categories are this: affection, friendship, and service. And so I'll take each of these in turn. First one, affection. So love can be expressed through just time given to one another, physical contact, acts of service, gifts. In some parlance, it's been called love languages, the way love's received and also given. Okay? The sharing of time looks like sharing meals together, okay? Sharing activities, holding hands, household chores, things like that, concentrated time together. But the key in all of this is to be a student of your spouse, to know how your spouse receives love, and then from that, working to communicate honest praise, appreciation, and thankfulness for him or her. Now, the flip side of this form of love is also being conscientious to refrain from harsh words, criticism, or anything of the sort. So we want to be intentional about communicating affection and growing love within the marriage relationship. Another aspect to strengthening our marriages in this time, not just affection, but also real, genuine friendship. Marriage is a friendship. The husband-wife relationship is to be closer than any other human relationship. We see this in the very beginnings, in Genesis chapter 2, where these words are used of this marriage relationship: helper, companion, friend. As Matthew Henry said way back in the 16th century on the passage in Genesis chapter 2, and I love this poetic description. He says this. He said, "Eve was made by God not out of Adam's head to rule over him, nor out of his feet to be trampled upon him, but out of his side to be equal with him, from under his arm to be protected by him, and from near his heart to be loved by him." I think that's a great picture of what marriage relationship should look like. It's a friendship, and it's a friendship that's cultivated by spending quality time together, recreation, entertainment, common work tasks, as I mentioned. Okay? Those are the things that bond you together. And one other dimension to that is the dimension of communication. Friendship grows through healthy communication. So both listening and opening up. So this friendship within marriage should be a secure context in which to share hopes, fears, hurts, frustrations. And I know, being a man, that this is a particular challenge for men, both to be good listeners and to be good at communicating our feelings, all right? But it really begins with making efforts to do that. Listening is an essential part of communication, and so is sharing personal matters, sharing from the heart. So communication is fundamental to friendship, and friendship is essential to strengthening your marriage in this time. The last category really is just this: service. Serving each other begins with the most practical tasks. It means helping out where there's a need, and being on the lookout to spot where that need is and to getting to it to address that need. Here's another important way in which we serve our spouse. We serve them by helping them grow spiritually. This means encouraging each other to participate together in the life of the local church, being active in a church. It means studying the Bible together, talking about what you're learning, how you're being challenged, and praying together with your spouse. So these are just basic spiritual disciplines, but spiritual disciplines which should be discussed and led out in the context of a marriage relationship. You know, if we look at Ephesians 5, Paul's famous chapter on marriage, we see there that Paul's heart is to present the church as the bridegroom. Well, as the bride to the bridegroom, Jesus Christ being the bridegroom, spotless, without wrinkle. We refer to that sometimes as sanctification, being set apart for Christ, or another word is just holiness. And there's a book called Sacred Marriage by Gary Thomas, and the fundamental premise of that book is his question: what if God created marriage to make us holy more than to make us happy? It's a good question. Marriage serves a great purpose. Marriage really is the great sanctifier. It is able to make us more like Christ than any other human relationship in this life. So we see these three things then that help us strengthen our marriage: affection, friendship, and service. Just a couple of resources that we recommend here. Number one, this is available on Right Now Media. There's a resource called The Art of Marriage by Family Life Today. You can view the 6 sessions, as I said, on Right Now Media free of charge. And it's a fantastic resource for strengthening your marriage in this time. And one book that I would recommend is a book called The Meaning of Marriage by Tim and Kathy Keller. They wrote it together, husband and wife. He was pastor Redeemer Presbyterian in New York City for about 30 years. And it's a great look at just not just the nuts and bolts of marriage, the theological foundations of marriage, but also just practical helps in marriage. So those are 2 resources we commend to you. Now our last question is this: how can I practically still disciple someone even now? Scott, would you help us with that?
Yeah, so again, we're still thinking about the situation that we're in now and how we live out the Christian life in an unusual situation. And so if you've been a part of Frederick for a while, you know that we say that we glorify God by making disciples of all the nations. And so that disciple making includes a couple of components, not just sharing the gospel, seeing somebody come to know Christ, but then walking with somebody to see somebody grow in Christ. And this is kind of spiritual mentorship and discipling of somebody. So really, how do you disciple somebody in a time where there's a stay-at-home order and you're not able to be together and go to Starbucks and sit down, have coffee, and read the Bible together? So what would it look like for you to carry out this command of discipling in this time right now? Because we remember that just because we're in this unusual situation, the command to be disciple makers doesn't change. It's just the format looks a little different. Well, just one thing I want to encourage you in, that this does not have to be something that's hard or complicated. You don't have to be some seminary-trained person to disciple somebody. You know what you need? You need the Word. You need some spiritual maturity. You need prayer. You have those things, disciple somebody. And it can be something as simple as just being in the Word together, reading the Word together, and walking through that and praying together. One of the methods that I know our college students have gone through, Paul Damery has used, and I love this method, is just they read through a book of the Bible or several passages together with an older believer. And it's really just as simple as that person, they read the Bible together, they talk about it, they share life a little bit together, they pray together, and that can be as simple as it is. Now, you won't be able to go to somebody's house right now to do that, but you could still Skype, Zoom, FaceTime, phone calls, whatever it might be, while you keep your social distancing, but still disciple somebody. The way I was discipled was by just going through books together. The guy who discipled me, would just read a book. We'd read a chapter at a time, talk about it, and he would just share insights in that chapter, and I would share what God was teaching me, and that's what we would do each week. And it was just as simple as that. And so I want to encourage you. The charge to make disciples hasn't stopped because we're in a crisis. It continues. So continue on with that. Keep seeking after the Lord and keep seeking opportunities to disciple people. Is there a family member? Is there a coworker? Is there a friend? Is there somebody that you could be discipling right now? And it doesn't have to be where you go up to that person or call them and say, hey, I want to disciple you. It could be just something as simple as you praying and looking for somebody who you could be spiritually mentoring now, and just ask that person, hey, would you be interested in reading through a book with me or reading through Scripture with me? Talk about it, pray together, discuss the chapter, whatever you're reading, and that can be it. It's just a simple way to disciple somebody. So keep pressing on in this big picture vision we have of glorifying God by making disciples and in discipling that we're talking about. So Pastor Chris, you want to close us out with our time tonight?
I could do that. I was just thinking the thread that kind of ties this all together is that word, discipleship, and is that word that Jesus left us at the end of the Gospel of Matthew. He said, go and make disciples of all nations, just what Pastor Scott was talking about, and our part in that, whether that is in the home, with our kids, with our spouse, with others that God has graciously given to disciple friends, and those we're mentoring or being mentored by, we have this promise that he, Jesus, is with us always, even to the end of the age. So in the difficult circumstances we find ourselves now, Jesus is with us. Tomorrow, Jesus will be with us. We can take that to the bank and be sure of that promise. So with that, we thank you for joining us for Pastor's Talk. And until next time, Lord bless you.